No appeals received for today's meeting.
Okay. Do we have any exempt items?
Yes, Chair. With the Board's agreement, Appendix 3 to Item 17, which is the White Rose Railway Station, Appendices 3, 3B and 3C to Item 19, acquisition of land for the A647, A6120 Dawson's Corner Junction Improvement Scheme, and Appendix 7 to Item 22, Adults and Health Service Review 6, Care Delivery, Care Homes Post-Consultation Recommendations Report, are all to be designated as exempt from publication and considered in private at the conclusion of the public meeting.
Thank you. Do we have any late items, please?
Thanks, Chair. With your agreement, a report entitled Update on the COVID-19 Pandemic Response and Recovery Plan has been circulated to board members prior to the meeting and is intended to be considered at agenda item 14.
Thank you. Do we have any, and I'm looking at members of the board now, do we have any declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests? Councillor Pryor.
With regard to agenda item 6, the Arts at Leeds paper, my partner is an employee of the Phoenix Dance Theatre, so Councillor Lewis will be taking the paper and I'll be absenting myself from the debate.
Thank you. Councillor Pryor, any more declarations? Councillor Carter, please.
Yes, I need to declare another registrable interest as a trustee of the Carby Charity appointed to this role by the council. I have sought a dispensation to speak but not vote on items 18 and 19, and this has been granted by the Chief Executive in accordance with the Council's constitutional arrangements.
Thank you. Noted. Just before we move on to the first item, I will just make a quick comment about the running of the meeting in room 6 and 7. Because of the COVID situation, we will hold the first hour and a half of the meeting, then we will adjourn for half an hour whilst the room is cleaned and ventilated, and then we'll come back for a second hour and a half block of the meeting. So that's going to be how the meeting will run this afternoon. So with that, I'm going to move on to the first substantive item, which is item 6, the Arts at Leeds 5-year extension. And I will ask Eve if you would like to introduce this paper, please.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, just by way of introduction, my name's Eve Roothouse and I'm the Chief Officer for Culture and Economy at Leeds City Council. This paper requests an extension to the Arts at Leeds grants by 1 year, meaning that the current funding round will be extended to the 31st of March 2023. There are a number of reasons for recommending this. The first is the capacity of the organisations across the city to be able to respond to a bidding process for extending those grants for a longer period of time of 3 to 4 years, which would be the norm. The second is the opportunity to link to the Arts Council England's funding round, which they took a decision as a result of COVID-19 to extend their funding round by 1 year earlier, in 2020 in fact. And many of the recipients of grants through Arts at Leeds use the grant funding that we provide to them to use as match funding for money that is then awarded to them through Arts Council England processes. Finally, there's been a change of personnel in the council in terms of officers. So the previous Chief Officer for Culture and Sport left in November, and the responsibility for grants has moved under myself, with support from Pam Johnson. And we need to allow sufficient time to ensure that we run a proper process for an extended, the new round of grants, and the timelines for that. This extension allows us to do that effectively in consultation, full consultation with members. So there's a timeline at the back that just gives an indication of how we will run this, with a review of the cultural funding programmes happening in January 2022. Two things to underline: this doesn't affect the council budget setting process, but it does provide assurances to the recipients of the grants that they will be able to continue their work in the next year. And secondly, if you look at the appendix, you'll see that the organisations that are supported through Arts at Leeds cross the whole of the city, with work in all wards. And again, the extension allows us to ensure that we can work with some of the larger organisations to make sure that more work is directed to some of those areas in the city where there may be less cultural activity at the current time. So I hope that provides a sufficient overview, Chair.
Thank you. That's a really useful introduction, and I understand as well the groups in question provide employment for over 1,500 freelancers who've really struggled during the COVID period as well, and have in total have brought in an additional £55 million of grant funding into the city pre-COVID per year. And I think again it's important to see that investment come in on top of our money. Are there any questions or comments on this item, please? Yes, please, Councillor Carter.
Yeah, just briefly, if I heard correctly, the decision to extend the the period of time does not have any budgetary implications. In other words, the budget still remains the budget and can be changed by the administration as it needs to. The second point is, as you are giving, I think it's 12 million to the City of Culture over this next few years, can I be assured there's no double counting in terms of grant funding here? And if that's something you need to take away and bring back, that's fine, but I would like some reassurance on that, please. Other than that, it's a sensible thing to be doing, if I get the clarification.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Carter, and we'll bring that information back to you that you've requested. Are there any more questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to refer to the recommendation on page 27, and I see everybody is happy with that recommendation. So thank you. Could somebody please fetch Councillor Pryor, please, as it's his paper next. Thank you. Item 7, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this next paper is the outcome of the consultation to permanently increase learning places at Allerton High from September 2022. This would increase the PAN from 220 to 280, which was strongly supported in the consultation and is necessary due to the increase in the population of children in the area. We've already increased the places in primary schools, so this follows on from that. I shall leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, please.
Yes, I welcome this permanent increase. The ward members in support of that, but they have asked me to point out that TROs are required by the Highways Department, and as far as they're concerned, that's been agreed, but they need to be implemented to protect existing residents.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that?
No, I'd agree with that. That's fine. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to move to the recommendation on page 47, and I take it everybody is happy with that recommendation. So we'll move on to item 8, please, Councillor Pryor.
Thank you. So this is the outcome of the consultation to permanently increase learning places at St Edward's Catholic Primary, also from September 22. This would increase the PAN from 20 to 30, which are needed places in the area and would help make the school more sustainable. There were a number of objections to this expansion, largely surrounding highways issues. To address this, a full traffic assessment and a transport statement will be produced to support the development of the scheme. But I do think it's worth noting that the school has been taking over PAN for a number of years. So the actual expansion of the school is in reality smaller than it is on paper, but I will leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor Carter would like to come in.
Yes, Chair. I mean, you've got to the nub of the problem, really. I would just say that most of the people who've contacted me, and indeed my discussions with the board members, all seem to be generally in support of the principle outlined here, but have raised very serious highways issues. Other members may not be aware, I'm sure that Councillor Pryor is, there are 3 schools exiting and accessing off the same road. One of them is West Oaks Special School. You will realise from that all sorts of vehicles bring young people to the school, which exacerbates the situation. And I would like some assurance that the Highways Department will do a thorough and complete assessment, and that we will act on recommendations as far as is possible to make sure that the residents and the children's safety is safeguarded. We've enough problems with infrastructure around schools all around the city without making a difficult job in this particular area even worse by just agreeing the enlargement without looking properly at the infrastructure implications.
Yeah, I think those are reasonable comments. And I can guarantee there'll be a thorough job done.
Thank you. If there's no other comments, I will turn to the recommendations on page 72. And I see everybody is happy with those recommendations. So that brings us on to Councillor Arif's paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got in front of us a proposal to create a new 48-hectare park incorporating a COVID-19 memorial woodland on the site of the former South Leeds golf course. And I'm genuinely delighted to bring this report to Exec Board today for a number of reasons. Firstly, everyone has had a difficult 18 months, and it is important that we have a fitting memorial in recognition of friends and families that we've lost during the pandemic. And secondly, to also appreciate the efforts of frontline and key workers who continue to do us proud. So it's really brilliant that we have been able to combine this with a fitting use of the former South Leeds Golf Club. The council were approached last year by the Leeds Hospital charity expressing their wish to work in partnership to develop a COVID-19 memorial woodland. Also, the Children's Mayor also approached us towards back end of the year, at which point the proposals were well developed. This new 48-hectare park and memorial woodland will support our pledge to combat climate emergency by planting 5.8 million trees over the next 25 years, whilst enhancing Middleton Park as a destination for both those paying their respect and to visitors in the area. The creation of the more parkland also provides a more greener space for local residents to enjoy, which obviously has got mental and physical health benefits. I look forward to the launch event, after which we can spread the word about the memorial and how to participate. We want to encourage everyone who is interested to, including people who have sadly suffered a bereavement during this time, to take part in the process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Arif. And it was great to go and visit the site this morning as well and just see on the old golf course the opportunity that's available to us there. Are there any questions or comments on this paper? Councillor Carter, please, and then
only to welcome the proposals and express the hope that we'll see these sort of initiatives spread throughout the city, which just reminds me of a comment Councillor Galton made at our last special executive on the Levelling Up Fund, when there was mention of woodland and parkland throughout the city. I think it was Councillor Galton who raised the issue of whether that fell into the criteria of that particular fund, and I suspect a citywide scheme does not necessarily do that. So I think we need to look very carefully at what we put in the next round does actually meet the criteria, and we maximise the opportunity of getting whatever funding is available, and look citywide if it's possible to do that.
thank you. Councillor Galton, would you like to come in, please?
Thanks, Chair. My response is less positive, I have to say. I will preface my comments with the fact that the Leeds Hospital Trust, which is the partner which is going to be delivering a COVID memorial woodland within this ex-golf course, is the Lord Mayor's charity for this year, and I am one of the trustees, and I wish them well, and I look forward to them being able to achieve the income that they wish to through this initiative that they have discussed with the council. What I object to really is the fact that the council, in its Parks and Countryside section, is committing a very substantial amount of money to what is effectively a tree planting scheme at a place in the city which already has really top quality parkland, and this would be added to it. In fact, you could argue it's sort of gilding the lily, because Middleton Park is an exemplar recreational space for people. And the amount of land which is being associated with the memorial woodland is 1/6, from my estimation, from the diagram which is being given to us, of the golf course itself. And this is really an exercise in the council acquiring land to plant a lot of trees, which is a good thing in itself, but it's also a very substantial investment that the council is making here of £700,000 on top of the money that they've already spent on taking over the lease. Also associated with this is the commitment to take on board 2 staff, I believe, for £30,000. This is at a time when the council already has other community parks which are having to suffer cutbacks and have staff shortages because, for instance, with the example of Springhead Park in Rothwell, a lot of staff are being attracted to better wages at Wakefield Council. And also, councillors are getting a lot of complaints very recently about the state of the roads in the city that aren't getting their grass cut back on them and having substantial issues with sightlines. And that's to create a saving of just £65,000. And it just feels like the department hasn't actually had a serious think about what its priorities should be going forward and where it puts its money. So I'm not going to vote against this proposal because I wouldn't like to get in the way of the partnership which is going to be happening with the charity in question. But I will also question the prominence of that memorial woodland in the presentation of this item, because, as I said before, it forms a small part, but also it's presupposing what the people of Leeds would like to see as their COVID memorial in this city. And I would like to think that we would have a far wider engagement of the general population in Leeds to understand what they think might be an appropriate place of commemoration of people who have died. And I would suggest that it probably would be somewhere a little bit more central. So I'd like to think that this isn't just the council's proposal for COVID memorial initiatives, and that actually we'll see something far more substantial in further papers. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. And I must correct you on the fact the council hasn't acquired this site. The council owned the site. It was leased out to an organisation and came back to the council. I think that's an important difference. We haven't. This was always council-owned land. I think that's important to say. If there's any suggestion that we have brought this land, I just thought that would needed clearing up. The lease came. We owned the land in the first place. You're absolutely right, Councillor Galton. Councillor Carter, would you like to come in, please?
Just very briefly, Councillor Galton's widened the debate way beyond the issue of Middleton per se, although I do agree with one or two of the things he said. And this is important that we recognise the whole city. He's raised the issue of grass cutting along the ring road, in particular in the sight lines. It's a bit unfair to level all the criticism at Parks and Countryside or their contractors, because to cut the grass on the side of the ring road, for example, they have to obtain licenses. The licenses come from the Highways Department. And I am told on very reliable information that getting these licenses in a timely fashion is like pulling teeth. And therefore, they cannot proceed unless they get the licenses. So I would urge the exec member to speak to the exec member for highways and find out what's causing the problem, because constituents right across the city are quite rightly drawing our attention to the fact that some of these sight lines are now so overgrown as to become dangerous to walkers, to cyclists, and to motorists. So could we please have some attention to that, please? That would be very helpful. And it reminds me of the old adage, departments have to learn to be able to think and chew gum at the same time, and they need to get on with it.
Thank you. I'm sure those points on highways, grass will get followed up. Are there any more comments on the item in front of us, which is the COVID-19 Memorial Woodland? Councillor Arif, please.
Just to say, Councillor Goldson, that the local public and the wider public will very much be consulted in how this goes forward. So it will be widely consulted on, so that those views will be taken into account as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 91, and I see everybody is happy with those recommendations and they're agreed. So we will move on to Councillor Hayden's papers and item number 10, please.
I'll put my microphone on. Thank you. So the first paper, item number 10, is the Transforming Cities Fund, and this is Leeds City Centre cycling improvements. And this seeks approval for the design and delivery of a package of 6 schemes to provide safe and segregated facilities for cycling and walking around the city centre. So these projects link existing cycle routes together to form a coherent network. And anybody who walks or cycles around the city centre or into the city centre then finds it very difficult to have an easy and safe link from north to south or east to west or any other. So we're looking to connect the city centre so that people have that choice of travel mode, and there'll be less dependency on the private car for short and medium length journeys. So I'll leave it there. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this paper? Okay. I'll turn to the recommendations on page 106, and I see everybody's happy with those. Thank you, Councillor Hayden, off to a good start there. Could we move on to item 11, please?
Thank you. So we go on to the Leeds local plan update, and this is a public consultation on the scope of the plan. So this is in light of new legislation and revised planning policy to help further address climate emergency in particular. On this basis, the report seeks approval to commence consultation on the proposed scope and plan update. So the local plan update has been prepared in line with planning regulations to review plans every 5 years. The list of proposed policies to be updated has been scoped by Development Plan Panel through workshops and meetings. The proposed scope reflects the commitment of full council to update the local plan to address climate emergency, and planning has a key role to assist in the 2 biggest contributors to the city's carbon footprint, which is transport and buildings, which between them make about 80% of our carbon output. The local plan update also responds to a need for places to be more resilient, which the pandemic lockdowns have made even more important. This will be achieved through better green spaces for well-being and to encourage us all to be more active. Green and blue infrastructure, which can be cheaper to install than grey infrastructure, and also helps address biodiversity loss and through high quality design and layout and resilience to flooding. So the proposed scope of the update and broad policy direction travel will now be subject to 8 weeks of public consultation, starting in mid-July, ending in mid-September. And this is longer than we're required to do, because we do want to hear from many and diverse Leeds communities about these plans. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Are there any comments? Councillor Carter, please.
Yeah, it's a document for consultation, and I'm pleased that the timescale has been extended. I hope we will take on board which we haven't always done. A lot of the constructive comments which will come in from residents of Leeds in updating the local plan. And I particularly want to just refer very briefly to flood risk, which I think is still a major threat to this city, despite the huge amount of money that we're spending, government money we're spending on our flood risk strategy. Certainly a number of wards where I've spoken to elected members, there have been interesting changes in the pattern of flooding. And I hope that that's picked up during the consultation period, because it remains, as far as I'm concerned, a very, very serious issue indeed. And indeed, it overlaps a number of the other issues in this paper. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll wait to see what the consultation brings forth. But certainly we shall be responding to it.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Gott, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to have some more detail about how we ensure that the consultation is accessible to people. I'm not particularly a fan of online map-based formats like the one that has been used to get consultation on highways priorities in the city, because it tends to preclude quite a large section of the population that don't have access, or more importantly, the time to go onto those online platforms. So I'd be interested to know what kind of ward-based one-to-one type activity would be taking place, considering that we should be allowed to unlock a little bit, given the current timescales, and how we actually, enable effective conversations, because I'm just looking at some of the key questions that the council is asking. And I'll give you an example of one. Question: do you think that planning policy should seek to reduce the embodied carbon emissions across the whole life cycle of a development? And do you have any further thoughts on whole life cycle carbon reduction, such as how quickly it should be used to require zero carbon development, or whether all development should be required to carry out assessments? That's not going to create a crush at any community building's door anytime soon if we're not actually opening up our engagement a little bit more effectively. So I'd like some reassurance on that.
Thank you. Councillor Hayden, please.
Thank you. Well, as somebody who struggles to understand that question, you can rest assured that I would want the consultation to be as open as possible. I mean, we've been in a very difficult situation the last year, unable to get out and consult face to face with our community consultations. I don't think a one-to-one consultations would be that an effective use of our officers' time. But I take your point about that particular question. So I'm going to bring Adam in a minute, but actually in terms of the highways consultation, we had thousands more people than normally get involved in a highways consultation. So it was actually very effective at getting out to many people who could then, if they weren't around at the time that webinar was happening, could watch it later on YouTube. And I don't have the actual stats, but many, many more people are actually involved in the highways schemes consultation than we would normally get in normal time of going out to our communities and talking to people face to face. But I'll bring Adam in, please, if that's okay.
Adam, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you. Just to introduce myself, Adam Harvat, Group Manager for Policy and Plans. Yes, the point I think is about choice and making sure that the public can interact with this in the way that is more suitable and easy for them. What we're trying to look at is summarising a lot of these documents. So obviously you've got a 100-odd page document in front of you there. We're making much shorter versions of that use that material, so that when people do consultations, they can, if they've only got say 10 minutes, we've got an option for them. So we're using our web site and the material to do that, and working very closely with excellent colleagues in comms and the web team to develop much shorter versions of this material. But in terms of being more bespoke for, say, ward members, a development plans panel, it was discussed that we'd provide PowerPoint material for ward members so that they could engage at a ward level as well. So we're working on that material to make it easier for ward members to start having those really useful discussions.
Thank you, Adam. Are there anything else from you, Councillor Hayden, please?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 151. And I see everybody is happy with those recommendations and they are agreed. So if we could move on to item 12, please, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you very much. This paper is a redevelopment of City Square, and it's the outcome of the design competition and appointment of the preferred designer. So it's I'm delighted to bring this paper to Exec Board this afternoon, and it seeks approval to the appointment of the preferred designer who will work proactively with the council and stakeholders to redevelop City Square from the design concept submitted as part of the design competition to an approved design. The design that was submitted as part of the competition obviously will be indicative of what the designer would like to see at City Square, but there'll be a lot of consultation and work with the council before a final design and stakeholders of all types of stakeholders before the final design is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, please.
That was a very delicately put headlong retreat from a paper. So, thank you, Councillor Hayden. But you answered most of my questions for you because you've decided to put the winner of the competition firmly back in the box and tell them it's indicative. And presumably they can stop referring to City Square as the Glade unless they want a revolution on their hands. City Square has throughout my lifetime and long before been City Square, and I hope it will remain so for a long time to come. So we can take it from that there is no subterfuge, no plan underlining all this to remove the statues and the black prints or anything else. Thank you for that reassurance. I shall remember that, Councillor Hayden. Well, if that's the case, I'm prepared to leave it and I'll wait till we get a chance to comment in detail. I hope you're not paying too much for the guidelines.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I always remember catching my bus from City Square on part of it that's now paved over. I think it's always been City Square to many of us here. Councillor Galton, please.
Well, Chair, I'm coming at it from a different angle because it's the last comment that Councillor Carter made, which was getting value for money for the guidance that you've got, because for the hundreds of thousands of pounds that have been spent on this REBA curated competition, I would expect something far more substantial at the end of it than just, oh, well, we've selected a person that will provide something that looks a little bit like the drawings that they've presented. It doesn't sound to me like a really good value deal with REBA. And that's one of the reasons why I was sceptical of it when it last came to the executive board. But I do think the council has an opportunity to redeem itself and actually make that a more meaningful investment. And I refer you back to the previous paper that I discussed with Councillor Arif, which is if City Square could incorporate some kind of city COVID memorial aspect, that I think would be something that the people of Leeds might be able to support as a fitting response to what they've been through over the past few years, and be something which is far more accessible than what has been proposed in Middleton. And if that could be, considered, that would be, I think, appreciated.
Thank you. I think clearly part of the Middleton proposal is to allow families to celebrate their loved ones, and sadly the number of people have sadly passed away in Leeds due to COVID would mean we need a larger area than City Square to do that, although I think putting some form of permanent memorial in City Square is part of it. And I also, again, you know, I was lucky enough to visit Middleton this morning. I think the tranquility and peace of that site compared to City Square is also an important part of that. But I do, you know, I know your comments are made in a constructive sense, Councillor Golden. I'm sure we can take that moving forward. I just wouldn't want to see it as an either or option. Martin, I saw you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. It was just in relation to costs. I mean, through the REBA competition process, the costs are in line with what you would expect for the design development of a scheme of this scale at this stage. So it's just a different way of delivering the design, but the costs fit within the parameters one would expect in terms of as a proportion of the total forecast scheme cost, if that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Hayden, do you have any more comments on this item, please?
Yes, please, if you'd indulge me. I mean, we have to get this right. It will always be City Square. There's no two ways about it. As long as I'm involved, it will always be City. It is City Square. That's what. And it's really exciting having that design. People bringing new ideas, and I think it's really good idea to have a competition. And as Martin said, it's within the parameters of what we would spend. We need to get this right. It's the gateway to the city. It's our flagship area. You get off the train, you come into City Square. I want it to be just phenomenal, so that I mean, I like it anyway now. I just, it would be really nice to have walking out the railway station, out of the Queen's Hotel, and straight into this amazing public realm. So we need to get this right, and we need to talk to the people of Leeds and all the stakeholders. Very much want to bring trees into it. It won't be called, you know, don't particularly want it to be called the Glade. I think that's a concept rather than, and I think the idea of COVID memorial is a really fitting one, and bringing that kind of green space into it is, I think what was really powerful about this this submission to the competition. I don't know whether you want to come in, Jane, about the competition.
Yeah, sure. More than happy to. So it was done in 2 phases. I hope you can hear me down there. It feels a long way. We first of all went out for expressions of interest and had 30 returns, which we narrowed down to 5 potential bidders. So as part of the bidding process, each multidisciplinary team of those 5 companies submitted their design concepts. We reviewed those against the design brief actually that we brought here, along with external members and internal members, Professor of Landscape Architecture from Leeds University, members of the Quality Places and Spaces group. And the scheme that is presented here was unanimously in first place by a considerable margin. So, and the added value to that is it's a local Leeds company, and they've worked very proactively and positively with us in the past. So it's exciting to see how this concept develops.
Thank you, Jane. I can't see anybody else with their hands up. So I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 300. And I see everybody's happy with those recommendations, so they are agreed. And if you could move on to item 13, please, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair. This is a Park Life, Fullerton Park and Matthew Murray update. So it's to, this report provides an update regarding the Council's Fullerton Park Life scheme. and the outcome of recent discussions with Leeds United Football Club around their preference to preserve the potential for a disposal of the former Matthew Murray High School site to LUFC as part of the club's ambition to relocate their training ground facilities closer to Ellen Road, but also as part of the proposals regarding the expansion of the Ellen Road Stadium. So Leeds United are looking to expand in the future, expand the Ellen Road capacity. So this, in discussions with them, it has been decided to move the Park Life footballing scheme to the former Matthew Murray High School site in Holbeck. And this will include a medical centre with a GP practice, which will be much needed in that part of the city, and fabulous facilities for the local people, as well as further afield, but keeping in the club's ambition to relocate their training ground to closer to Ellen Road. So I'll leave it there for the moment for questions, please.
Councillor Carter, please.
Yeah, would it be unfair or true to say that Leeds United have changed their mind on this at a very late stage, and it somewhat delayed the whole process? And I'm sure Jane Warren can answer that. Nevertheless, support the paper, but it has been left a bit late and delayed the whole process, and that particularly irks me because, of course, Woodhall playing fields are part of the Park Life presentation as well, and I'd like some reassurance that when this comes back, which I gather will be September time, the Woodhall proposals will be included, that we can then move forward with both proposals PDQ.
Thank you. Jane or Martin, are you able to pick those points up, please?
Perhaps if I start and then Jane can correct me, Leader. In terms of it late, I think it couldn't have been left any later. I think it's fair to say, but I think as members of the council would, you'd want to have regard to the importance of Ellen Road as a football stadium, and if Leeds United, they have changed their position and wish to expand to 55,000 seats. So if we can facilitate that, then that's the reason for the recommendations that have been made. And as outlined in the report, Leeds United will pay our costs for redesign, recognising that we're acting at their request. So there's that. And then with regard to Woodhall, when we go forward to Park Life with our schemes for the final bid to secure the final sign off, we need to take 2 schemes forward. So we've got 3 schemes, as you know, and Green Park at Thorpe Park is going forward through planning. So on the basis that that secures planning, then we'll be able to go forward with Woodhall. This will cause a delay to this scheme, but on the basis that we have 3 that we're moving forward, then we'll be able to bring them forward still to the Football Foundation. And we will come back with a comprehensive report on the Park Life scheme, as you asked, Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Martin. Are there any more comments on this paper? I don't see anybody else, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 216, and I see everybody is happy with those recommendations. So we move on to the paper under my portfolio, which is the update on the coronavirus pandemic. And I think in introducing this paper, it's welcome to see many signs of normality returning to the city. I understand that footfall in the city centre is rising at the weekend. We're starting to see more people back in the city during the week, and starting to see some of those as indications that the recovery is coming back to us. I think we can't speak to this paper without talking about the rise in infection rates in the city, which we've seen an increase in over the last week. And at this point, I will ask Councillor Arif to come in and just talk a little bit about our understanding and response to that rise in the infection rates, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as many people will be aware, we've had an increase in rates, particularly in the Hyde Park and the Woodhouse wards. Just to really say that Leeds is pretty much consistent with the rest of the cities in terms of the increase in the cases. There's been a combination of things, really. We've obviously had the easing of lockdown, which has meant that we've had more social contact. That combined with the fact that we have the Delta variant, which is now the dominant variant and is far more transmissible. And of course, our younger population isn't yet fully vaccinated because the over 18s opened only last week. We have responded to that, Chair. We've got 3 centres, enhanced testing centres, where we're offering PCR tests. So we've got the Mandela Centre, we've got the Gryphon Centre and Cindermore. I was at Cindermore yesterday. We've had quite a bit of publicity around that. It's been taken quite well from local residents, and ultimately we're encouraging everybody to do their part, get tested. They may well be carrying the virus and maybe asymptomatic, and that's one way for us to combat it. But of course, the key thing is the vaccination, and we need to get people vaccinated. Also, earlier in the week, on Monday, the Bilal Centre was opened to cross the city from 10 o'clock in the morning to 5 p.m. for anybody who's over the age of 18 to get vaccinated. Just hearing anecdotally a brilliant response to that. So we're keeping an eye on things. And I think, I'm sure Victoria probably may well come in on this. The key thing is for us is keeping an eye out on the hospitalisations. And we are looking at those, and they are quite low at this point. But of course, we'll continue to monitor those. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Arif. Are there any questions or comments on this paper? Oh, that's great. Thank you, Councillor Carter. I'll make sure everybody involved in it, I think it does cover the breadth of work, that's going on. So if we're all happy to agree the recommendations, we'll now move on to Councillor Cooper's paper, please, and item 15.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Item 15 is the financial performance and the outturn of the financial year ended in the 31st of March 2021. The position is much improved to what we were expecting at the beginning of the year, and it means that we didn't have to use the capital receipt from Miriam House to help with the general fund. We're also able to use the 1 million underspend to put into our reserves, which is a much needed addition to our reserve position. I'll leave it there, Chair, for any questions from any members.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, please.
Yes, well, first of all, it's some light at the end of this particular tunnel. Clearly, the council is not in as difficult a state as it could have been financially. And I wonder whether that is going to result in you perhaps having a look at the staffing situation in certain departments of the council, which are now quite clearly under very great strain, particularly public-facing departments. And I realise we have to have a great care about that in terms of the medium and longer term financial strategies, not getting ourselves back to where you were. I'd also like to know, how much money have the government given the city in terms of COVID assistance, both directly and indirectly? Have we an answer to that, Victoria or Neil?
It's am I okay to come in?
Yes, please, Victoria.
Thank you. It's included in the report around the amount of funding that's available from central government. We actually received 72.2 million for the expenditure, and for the loss of income we received 27.4 million. It doesn't know that. Okay, I'll bring that. I'll get that and send that through. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Councillor Carter. Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to endorse Councillor Carter's comments about recruitment in customer-focused departments. I'm not sure if I need to shout over the sound of the helicopter, so I won't. In particular, the difficulty in performance we've seen in planning, the difficulty that ward members have had in taking forward ward-based highway schemes when so many highways officers are tied up with city centre investment. And also, of course, to look at the parks teams, which are under pressure, which I mentioned earlier. And secondly, of course, has the administration considered, given the much more positive financial situation that they find themselves in reviewing some of their budget decisions, which they said they did with a heavy heart, to reconsider them and perhaps put them back into their current budget? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. My reading of this paper isn't that even though we've avoided a catastrophe, we're not in a positive position. You know, the austerity that started under the Conservative Lib Dem coalition has certainly not gone away. And although things haven't been as bad as we were predicting some months ago, I wouldn't necessarily describe the financial position as positive. Councillor Cooper, would you like to sum up on this paper, please?
Yeah, thank you, Leader, and all your comments will be taken into account when setting the budget for next year in regards of what's needed to happen in the city. I would just like to say a huge thank you to all our employees, I have to say, and those in particular that we lost during the year who on Early Leavers Initiative, who did help us bring about a balanced budget. You know, so I just want to say a huge thank you to them and look forward at some point to be able to celebrate the service that they gave to the city when restrictions allow us to do that. But please rest assured that we will be looking in great detail about setting the budget for next year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 335 and see everybody's happy with those recommendations. So if we could move on to item 16, please, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. And the next item is the Treasury Management Outturn report for the year 2021. And just I'll leave that for any questions from members.
Thank you, Chairman. It's perhaps as well to remind you, in view of the comments you just made, that actually I can tell you how much money the city has received from the government through COVID. It's £600 million plus. So much for austerity. And I note on the Treasury Management Report that the MRP situation has in fact deteriorated slightly, and you now owe 53 million in interest payments on MRT, which I think you would call self-inflicted austerity, for which your administration is entirely and wholly responsible. Other than that, I think I should thank the Treasury Management team because they've done an extraordinary job in managing the budget and managing Treasury management, and indeed guessing correctly. If it was guessing, I'm sure Victoria said it wasn't guessing, when we should have more short-term borrowing and more long-term borrowing. And on that subject, I have one point. A lot of economists and a lot of other people are predicting that interest rates at some stage in the short to medium term will rise. What safeguards, if any, do you think we can take, given the extent of our borrowing, to protect the people of Leeds from the worst effects of that?
Thank you. Sorry, we'd like to come in, Victoria, please.
Thank you. We have had a strategy around the Treasury management on our borrowing position, and we have moved away from having short-term borrowing into the longer-term fixed rates that we had some certainty. We're continuing with that over the medium terms that we're projecting forward what our capital programme will be, and we're tracking the rates very closely so that we take advantage of when we can lock in on those for the future, and that's what we're doing to secure that position. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Victoria. And I think it's worth pointing out on minimum revenue provision, we've never seen a credible plan from any other party on the council of how increased and higher debt payments in the past could have been met without reducing frontline services over recent years. So I think it's worth pointing that out to exec board as well. You know, I don't want to start quoting the current Prime Minister and calling people Captain Hindsight, but certainly it'd been, you know, we've never seen a proposal from any of the other parties on how that could have been dealt with. So with that, I'm going to look at the. I've read every single budget amendment that's come in during the period of minimum revenue provision, and there was never an alternative. There was never an alternative to taking to take. I've had a lot of spare time during lockdown, Councillor Carter. I've had a lot of spare time. So moving on to the recommendations on page 390, and I would recommend anybody starts reading the old budget amendments as well, just to understand the position. I won't make that an additional recommendation, but I take it everybody is happy with the recommendations on this paper. So I will move on to item 17, please, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Carter, for your comments on the good Treasury management of this administration as well. So to move on to item 17, which is the proposal around the bringing forward the White Rose Railway station project that's much needed in that area of the city around ensuring that we've got good economic recovery, good employment opportunities and good facilities for local residents. This paper is asking for approval from Executive Board for a loan facility to Munro K to ensure that that can take place. I'll leave it there, Chair. Questions, if there are any.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there any questions on this paper? Nope. So I'll just turn quickly to the recommendations on page 401 over onto page 402, and I take it everybody is happy with those recommendations. It's great. So we'll move on to item 18, please. Councillor Carter, please.
The item on which I saw, and the next one, this presentation, I speak very briefly. The council is a sole trustee, that's quite correct, and the three people appointed as trustees are the three ward councillors, and we realise that the council has to take certain steps in order to implement the Dawson's Corner scheme and need to purchase the land. The only issues that I wanted to raise are around the standard of landscaping that takes place under the next proposal, which is critical to the people who live adjacent. And we've made certain suggestions, and to avoid having to speak to them today, I've raised them directly with highways, but they relate to a footway across the land to enable people to have safe access by foot onto the ring road, onto the footpath, and across the crossing to Leeds, to New Pudsey Station, which is essential. And I've had some assurances on that, but I'm going to pursue it in writing with them. But I would like to make one point. It's a good job that I was reminded of the new code of conduct. And I would strongly suggest that our legal department look at what we've actually done, because I realised that I was, without a dispensation, unable to speak on this, although it's in my ward. I'm a trustee appointed by the council to the charity. I get no financial reward at all, but I can't speak. Now, if you look around this table, every single one of us is probably in a similar position. And to sign up to a code of conduct that actually stops an executive member from speaking, albeit in this case on a ward matter, I think we've slipped up somewhere, because I don't think any of our constituents would appreciate us being in that position. And I do hope that our legal department will look, because I understand we've adopted almost wholesale the LGA's recommended code of practice. And I'm not saying there shouldn't absolutely the strongest code of practice possible, but if it results in having to ask for a special dispensation, then I'm afraid Mr. Reardon's going to be swamped with them over the months to come. And I do think we need to look at it.
Thank you. We note the comments on the item, and again, the code of conduct, more than happy to raise the points. It was taken through a number of cross-party meetings and forums before it was agreed, but clearly, if it is causing problems in practice, I am happy to ask for that to be looked at again, and obviously we will work on a cross-party basis as we did in establishing the current code of conduct to work those through. So are there any more comments on this item? I note from your opening remarks, Councillor Carter, at the beginning of the meeting that you won't be voting on this item. Okay. Okay, so I'll look at the noted that and see everybody else is happy with that paper. So we'll move on to item 19, please, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. And just to take Councillor Carter's comments regarding some points of clarification he wanted from highways about the landscaping and so on. If this is the kind of the legal side that we're dealing with in terms of the disposal and acquisition of the land, but actually it falls within Councillor Hayden's portfolio, and I'm sure she'll take those comments away and deal with them, Councillor Carter. So item 19 is the acquisition of the land at Dawson's Corner to allow the junction improvements to take place. I'll just leave it there, Chair, because I think we've been through it enough.
Thank you. Are there any more comments on this paper? Okay, I don't see anybody commenting. So again, for Councillor Carter's indicated he won't be voting on this item, and I see every other member of the board is happy with the recommendations that are set out on page 450. So we will agree that paper and move on to item 20, please, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Going at a rate of knots through these papers today. So my next item, which is item 20, which is the annual health and safety, wellbeing, performance and assurance report, albeit there wasn't a report last year because we'd just gone into lockdown. So there are a few points just to say about the health and wellbeing report. That this is the 8th consecutive year that there's been a reduction in accidents and no enforcement notices for the council. and that all of their statutory assessments and surveys have taken place in a timely way. The report does go into great detail in that members will, I'm sure, have read. And again, I'd just like to thank our teams actually dealing with this during a very challenging year to ensure that all our employees and all our residents were kept safe in such a difficult way. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Any questions or comments on this? Okay, so I'll look at the recommendations on page 476. And I see everybody's happy with those, so we'll agree them. So we'll move on to your last paper, Councillor Cooper, which is item 21.
Thank you, Chair. And the last paper under my portfolio today is item 21, which is the consideration of the future developments regarding addressing and reducing on-street sex work in the city. As members of the Executive Board will know, that I have contacted every member of council with a written correspondence around this paper as well, to notify them about this report. And it's also been widely trailed in the media as to this report as well. So I don't intend to go into great detail, but I'll answer any questions that may be raised, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, please.
Yes, Councillor Cooper. Do you agree with this statement? You will have seen that my position on the Holbeck managed area was very clear. I don't think it protected women and girls. I'm really pleased that Leeds have taken this position, being the position outlined in this paper. Do you agree with that, Councillor Cooper?
Well, Councillor Carter, I have, as you know, my own position on the managed approach. And I think that the managed approach has given benefits to the local residents, to women and to girls, and to safeguard sex workers in the city. And we can take the lessons that we've learned from the managed approach to a wider strategy in the city to enable us to reduce the amount of sex work that happens in the city going forward.
Well, as you haven't answered the question, I'll tell you who made the statement. It was Mayor Tracy Brabin in the answer to a question that was put to her by Councillor Amanda Carter only this week. So he only in 2020, before we went into lockdown, you had a so-called independent study done, which was reported to this board. The recommendations were that whilst some improvement needed making, that it should be kept in place. Since that time, we've been, or not long after that, we've been in lockdown. So there's no wonder that things have, in inverted commas, improved. But I think that this is an admission that the whole experiment failed and that we should have come to this conclusion some considerable time ago and put in place a much broader package to help these mainly women in the predicament that they find themselves relating to drugs, alcohol and various other sorts of abuse. I'm glad that we're going to do that now. But that leaves the residents of Holbeck. Now, a lot of them, as you well know, have been very upset by what they've seen and what's gone on. And I think one of the big problems from the start was that certainly, and I won't attach this to you, but certainly to your former leader, it was sort of a badge of honour, a badge of courage that she blazoned all around the countryside and beyond, that we were the only city to have a red light managed zone. without ever asking yourself the question of why we're the only city. And that's, of course, because it's extremely difficult thing to tackle. And I accept that. And I accept too that you tried. But we are, to a large extent, back to square one. And I will look forward to more details coming forth on how you propose to tackle the problem now without ending up with other communities in the same state the Holbeck community was left in. And I can't help but think that other forces have been brought to bear on this complete about turn, and you can say what you want. It is a complete about turn, which has left, I think, everybody on both sides of the argument up in the air.
Would you like to come back, Councillor Cooper, please?
Yes, please, Leader. I think it's important to remember why the managed approach was introduced in the first place. And that was to tackle the high number of sex workers who were operating in the Holbeck area and historically that has been the area that sex workers were operating. The reasons that we introduced the managed approach really were to reduce street-based sex work, were to reduce the problems caused to residents and businesses by street-based sex work, and to help sex workers to exit that way of life. And in 2018, there was an enhanced model brought in terms of designated resources that were brought in around policing, cleansing and support for sex workers within the managed approach, and for residents also within who were affected by the managed approach. But in March 2020, of course, we all know that the lockdown occurred, the pandemic hit us and the lockdown occurred. And so we had to stop the managed approach because of the government restrictions on being out of the house and social distancing and everything else. So we had to stop the managed approach operating then. But what we didn't stop was the support that we gave and the dedicated resources that we gave to the local community and to the sex workers in Holbeck at the time. And it's because of those packages of support that we've seen a huge reduction in on-street sex work, as well as the impact of the pandemic. But it's through that support. And the paper, if you read it, shows you some of the case studies that we've had as well, of women who have been helped through that support and enabled to find a better route than on-street sex working. And so I do think that we're in a changed world. The independent review, you're right, we did have an independent review, and the recommendations we have been working through since that independent review through Safer Leeds and through the working groups within Safer Leeds as well. We also listened to a Listening Well report that came from local residents in Holbeck who raised some issues and concerns, and we always said that the approach would be evolving, and that we'd always listen to what residents wanted and to what was happening on the ground, and always adapt as best as we could within the restraints of the managed approach. And I think we're now at a point in time, which is why I've brought this paper to Executive Board, and it's for endorsement, because it will be going to Safer Leeds for the decision. It's not Executive Board that make the decision. Safer Leeds will be making that decision. That actually through all the efforts we've made and for the changing circumstances, that we're now at a point that we can cease to operate the managed approach in the way that it's been done. But we can evolve our approach to a citywide strategy to deal with and manage sex work in that way on a citywide. And I look forward to sharing that work with you and Councillor Amanda Carter as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I feel very uncomfortable and I felt it during the mayoral campaign, actually, when the managed zone was used politically as a campaigning tool. And I never raised it in my candidacy, and thankfully I was never asked to comment on it either. I think the council, in its innovative approach to tackling prostitution in the city, was brave, and it was forward-looking, and it tried something, and the Liberal Democrat group were fully behind that experiment. It is with regret that as that experiment progressed that we realised that the commitment to investment in the management that was needed to make it work wasn't there from whichever part of the partnership that we're talking about. And that it clearly wasn't working for the community that was in it. We didn't campaign on it, though. We just basically made our views known to the administration because they were in a very difficult position. And this paper, I welcome that the council has come to a conclusion, but from the very title of the paper itself, it's a very confused conclusion that the council has come to, because it assures us that all the support that we want to see for women who are exploited, and let's not forget this, street work is in the vast majority of cases a case of exploitation of women through the trade of sex. I appreciate that there are other sex workers that do it voluntarily, but generally that is done in a different format. And it's the very vulnerability of the people involved at this stage which merited the attempt at a managed approach from the council. So I'm not going to congratulate campaigners who've gone against the managed zone for a victory in this one. I accept it with regret, but I really do want to see something a little bit more concrete in terms of what is being taken forward that is a positive for the managed zone to enable that work to happen with the women that are being exploited successfully. Because I've had correspondence, and I know that Councillor Carter will have, and as has everybody else, from people who are concerned from organisations such as BASIS, which in this paper implies, you know, they're still going to get the same support as they always have, but they're offering concerns that they won't be able to operate in the same way under a new regime. So I don't think this is the end of the subject. I think we need to have another paper again to talk about how we've emerged from the official managed zone to actually having a partnership management approach which doesn't involve legalisation of any kind. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. We'd like to come back on those points, please, Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, thank you. And we also have James Rogers and Paul Money in the room if they would like to come in and comment on anything that you've heard from members. But I would just say, before I invite them to do so, that as in my response to Councillor Carter, that this was never a static position. And it was always an evolving approach, and we were always on a learning, test and learning, and finding out where what worked and what didn't work. And from that position now, we're able to evolve it to not just on street-based sex work, but more sex work that's happening in the city generally, to a strategy around that. And again, you know, I'm more than happy to share that strategy when that comes out. It's not the end of the story, and it's not something, you know, that I am standing up and celebrating. I have to say, because I think the efforts that have gone in from all our partners, from the police, from local residents, from local third sector organisations, and from our own members of Leeds City Council and officers have gone to great lengths to ensure that actually what was happening at the managed approach was dealt with appropriately and properly. And I thank them for all that work that's enabled us to be in the position that we're in now. But I'll pass over to James and Paul, if that's all right, Chair, just to, if they have any further comments.
If you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I'll be relatively brief, and then I'll hand over to Paul just to go into a bit more detail on one particular issue which I think is important. I think, as Councillor Cooper said, this clearly is a challenging issue that all large UK cities have a challenge in dealing with. And we've had a particular approach in Leeds for the last few years, which we're all well aware of. And this, as Councillor Cooper said, isn't the end of any particular issue. The issue is still there to be dealt with, but we can now look forward to deal with it in a different manner, bearing in mind the circumstances that we now face and the resources and the capacity, in particular the intelligence that we've now got in place in terms of knowing the cohort of women and vulnerable women who we are working with. And I think the key thing looking forward is recognising the vulnerability of a number of those women who are involved in sex work, what we're actually going to do to actually support those women looking forward. And I'd just like to ask Paul just to go into some of the thoughts on some of the actions that we're going to take forward and retain as part of the new approach.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, James. Yeah, I think just by way of starting this, the context in which this type of sex work is playing out now in the area where we've got it in South Leeds is very different from what we had in 2014 and just before that. And the approaches just before that, of course, in terms of a response to this issue, were heavily reliant upon enforcement action. What we've learned as this process has evolved, as Councillor Cooper has talked through there, are significantly improved ways of addressing some of the key issues, and the key issues in terms of managing on-street sex work in Holbeck have been significantly responded to. In terms of the sex workers, who are a very vulnerable group of individuals, the support to them is wholly different from what it looked like pre-2014, and has in fact evolved through this process of the managed approach. And to cut to the chase, we're not so heavily reliant now upon the existence of a zone to continue to provide that support that's done in a multi-agency way through each and every individual being case managed and supported around what are typically multiple complex needs. And we've seen some significant benefits from approaching our support arrangements to these women through this particular style of approach. And we see no significant issues with continuing to do that in the context of what's happening now in the Holbeck area. And organisations like BASIS and the Joanna Project remain fundamental parts, component parts of our partnership moving forwards. It very much is a joined up multi-agency collegiate response to addressing the issues, and we're reassured and we are encouraged by the significant improvements that have taken place over the last few years that we intend to build on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and James. And Councillor Carter wants to come back.
Yeah, Councillor Galton made a point that I think needs picking up. You'll recall that when the proposal for this trial originally was brought forward, all I can recall, certainly the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives voted in favour of the trial. So it's unfair to suggest that we are somehow going back on what was originally said. But the member who was the cabinet member then, Councillor Dobson, who introduced the scheme and drove it through, now the leader of Garforth Independence, he has changed his mind, as Councillor Galton has changed his mind with regret, as I have changed my mind, and a long time ago. And so I suppose what I'm saying is, it is the speed with which you have come to the view that this actually was not the answer. And we seem to me to have spent a heck of a long time and caused a lot of people a lot of distress in Holbeck, and not particularly well served or helped these young women who desperately need our help, whilst this apparently evolved. And it only came to a conclusion because of a pandemic. It has nothing to do with the managed zone at all. And to say that, well, that proves that it's in some miraculous way had the effects you intended, I think is somewhat disingenuous, I have to say. I will look forward to being able to support a wider strategy that certainly doesn't involve inflicting upon groups of our residents the sort of things they've had to put up with for too long, some of which were addressed, you're quite right, but it took one hell of a long time to do it. And also the package of support we're giving to some very vulnerable and often very young girls. So I look forward to that coming back, and I do hope that it's a strategy that we can all support. But I would just say this, when something clearly is not working as you intended, the best way is to draw a veil more speedily than this, because I don't think you've learnt anything in this last 14 months because the place has been in shutdown. You can't have.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, would you like to sum up this item, please?
Yes, thank you. And of course, it would be no surprise to you that I disagree with Councillor Carter's last comments, I have to say. I think we've learned a great deal from the managed approach, from its inception to the end, and to its evolving now into a citywide strategy. I think some of your comments around that it's been damaging to young women and to local residents, I also would disagree with many of them. We have taken, as an administration, their concerns and their views very seriously over the years, certainly since I have been the exec board member with responsibility for community safety. And we have listened very closely to what they have had to say and adapted as we've gone along. This is not the first adaptation, it's not the first change since I've been executive board member around the managed approach. We have tried to evolve it to suit everybody's needs going forward. And I think that we've done that, you know, in a way that has been supportive of the sex workers. It's been supportive of local residents' needs and local businesses in every way, as I've said, that is possible. So I entirely disagree with your last comments, Councillor Carter.
Okay, and I recognise obviously everybody that's spoken on this has recognised that this is a difficult and challenging issue, and I'm sure we will be working on supporting everybody who is at risk of harm, and that will be the focus of our work moving forward. So I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 488 and seek approval from the board, and I see everybody is happy with those recommendations. We've now reached the end of our first hour and a half, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting at this point. And if we are back for 3 o'clock, and we'll finish off the last items and the below the line items. Good afternoon, everybody. We are, for this meeting during the current restrictions, we had to, like a football game, do it in two halves with half time. So welcome back to the second half. I don't think we've got any substitutes here, so we will make a start. So we are on to Councillor Venner's portfolio and item 22. So could I ask Councillor Venner to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. This paper proposes the closure of two care homes, Richmond House and Homely House. This is absolutely not a proposal the Directorate has come to lightly. In preparing for this meeting, I've read every word of every objection, and I totally appreciate that the proposed closure of care homes causes distress and anxiety to people who live and work in them. And if this is agreed, every effort will be made to support people to move into other homes and to redeploy staff who want to continue working in the Directorate. The moves of people will be done by experienced social workers and done with compassion and the full involvement of residents and their families. The context of this proposal is that the Council faced a budget deficit of 118 million for the financial year 2021 to 22. Half of this is directly attributable to COVID and half is the result of 11 years of austerity and cuts to local government funding. Despite this, children's and adult social care has been protected in the funding cuts the Council has had to make, now represents almost 70% of our expenditure, up from 45% in 2010. And of course, a major context for this is the utter failure of the government to adequately fund social care. The other context is a continuous decline in the demand for care homes and an increase in the demand for home care. This was already the case pre-pandemic, but is even more the case now. Both homes have run significantly under capacity for some time. 18 people currently live in Homely House in Rothwell, which is 62% occupancy. And there are a large number of other good and outstanding care homes within a few miles of both homes. This includes Dolphin Manor, also in Rothwell Ward, which currently has 14 vacancies. Some objections have suggested other ways we could save money, but these are often from other funding streams, such as spending less money on cycle lanes. However, government funding for things like highways cannot be spent on care. If we do not close Richmond House or Homely House, the funding the saving would need to come from elsewhere in adult social care, when other parts of the Directorate are under increased demand. For example, there is hugely increased demand at the front door of adult social care as the fallout from the pandemic becomes felt. And with regard to older people, we have become aware of thousands of older people living on their own in Leeds in the community who've lost a huge amount of confidence and mobility as a result of the last 15 months, and we are likely to need to invest significantly more supporting older people in the community. This proposal does not reflect a wider disinvestment in social care either. We are currently investing significant funding in both adults and children's social care to build two new residential homes, one for adults and one for children, with complex medical needs, disabilities and learning disabilities. Both homes will bring adults and children back into Leeds who are currently in residential placements outside the city. Whilst there is a decline in demand for care homes, there is increased need for extra care housing for older people, which is being developed across the city, including in Rothwell Ward. Neither of these sites, Richmond House and Homely House, are big enough for extra care housing, which would have been our first choice for how the sites would be used. But if this is approved, they are going to be used for housing. In Rothwell Ward, it would be general needs social housing, and the plan for the Richmond House site is that it will be designated for older people specific social housing. Richmond House began as a joint project with the NHS and has not been financially viable since the NHS decommissioned the service because they wanted to provide community rehab in a different way. Average occupancy in Richmond House since 2018 to 19 has been 55%. Richmond House did not attract the same level of objections as it is not people's home. The most heartfelt objections are from people who use the home for respite and we are committed to finding other respite options for carers who rely on Richmond House to be able to continue to care for people at home. The closest community care bed service is Green Lane Intermediate Care Centre in Armley, which is 5.5 miles from Richmond House. And there are an additional 27 homes within a 5-mile radius where respite care can be spot purchased. There are also other respite care options such as shared lives. As outlined in the introduction, I've read all the objections from families of people in Homely House and from residents themselves. And this really is not a proposal we would be putting forward if we had other options or nowhere else for people to live. The proposal to close this home is not a reflection on the quality of care in the home, which has a good rating overall with an outstanding rating for care. But it is not the bricks and mortar that make the care outstanding, but the staff who we would hope to retain in the directorate. As outlined, there are also 10 good and outstanding homes within a 5.5-mile radius of the home. And as I said, this includes Dolphin Manor in the same ward, which has 14 current vacancies. There are also good and outstanding homes within a 5-mile radius of next of kin addresses, should residents choose to move nearer next of kin. And our plan for this site is the creation of much needed social housing for the area. I'll leave my comments there, Chair, and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner, for that introduction. And are there any questions? Councillor Carter, please.
Yes, comments, really. 300 pages. 300 pages to reinforce a decision you took long ago. I just raised the question. All we've got is the same answers we had before the consultation started, which I think rightly leads people to believe that it's a 300-page long paper exercise. I'm sure that Councillor Galton will be speaking in connection with the home in his ward, and I'm certainly just going to speak briefly as regards Richmond House, because I've said it so many times before. This is not the first time the council has tried to close Richmond House. I question how robust the discussion has been with the NHS to keep it open. It's certainly much valued, which is witnessed not only by the comments made, but also by the people who've contacted me directly and via the local Facebook pages. So I think the decision's wrong. I think the timing is appalling. Just before the end of lockdown, and to quote occupation figures during 14 months of lockdown, I think is significantly misleading. I hear the comment about it not being, site not being big enough for extra care housing. I would want to see some very firm evidence that that's the case, because I suppose if you, and I suspect you will, despite my objections, vote to close it, extra care housing would have been the next best option. But for general older people's housing, that is massively disappointing and needs to be, I think, looked at very seriously again. And as a ward member, I should be writing to both the Director of Housing and the Director of Adult Social Care on that subject. So, as I say, 300 pages to reach the conclusion that you'd already reached before, and had once before been reached by this council, which we managed to get you to rethink. I don't believe, as I said, that the talks with the NHS have been robust enough, and I'm extremely sorry that you've just rubber stamped your conclusion. And I'm afraid, Councillor Venner, you can read 300 pages all you want, but if you come up with the same conclusion that you started with, you might have read it, but you certainly haven't understood it.
Councillor Venner, or any of the officers, would you like to come back before I move on to Councillor Golden, please, so we don't lose any of the points there? Thank you.
I just make a couple of points. It is 300 pages, and I've read them all. I've read them all very, very thoroughly. And the reason we came to the same conclusion is because, as I pointed out at the beginning, the two contexts of this are the financial savings that we have to make in adult social care combined with the decline in demand. And we haven't just based the figures on what's happened during lockdown. The figure I quoted of 55% average occupancy goes back to 2018 to 19. We're having very robust conversations with the NHS across adults and children's social care, and have been doing for the last couple of years around joint investment. But actually the reason this has been looked at before is because it hasn't been viable since the NHS decommissioned it, because they wanted to provide community rehab in a different way. And we are committed to using both sites for social housing, and neither site is big enough for extra care housing, which would have been our first choice. There's not a philosophical reason we're not choosing extra care housing, they're not big enough. But we do recognise that there is a need in your ward, Councillor Carter, for housing for older people, which is why we've committed that that's what that site will be for. Thank you. I don't know if Kath or Shona want to add anything.
Just a couple of points to add. I think it is really important to undertake consultation. We do occasionally come back with different recommendations, and I would remind Executive Board the outcome of the consultation in 2016 was actually to keep the green but turn it into a recovery hub. So we didn't close the green, well, we closed it as a long-term care home, but we did respond to some of the comments made and retained that as a recovery hub. We did have very robust conversations with the CCG about the possibility of Richmond House being one of its portfolio of community care beds, which is the language that they use now for intermediate care. The outcome of that was that we secured three of our homes for intermediate care, but unfortunately not Richmond. And one of the things that constantly fettered the ability to develop Richmond is because it is only 20 beds, and it's just it drives the unit cost, whereas the three homes that were successful and now is the Northwest, the South, and these recovery hubs were bigger homes. So I think we did have good outcomes from those conversations. It was just very unfortunate for Richmond because of its size.
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Galton, did you indicate to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are some real inconsistencies in the case for the closure of these homes. And I have some serious concerns as to how the conclusion has come to that it's appropriate. With Councillor Venner taking over a new portfolio, which included children's social care alongside adult social care, I did hope that there would be some parity of esteem that would be focused on both of those delivery of care. Because historically, of course, whenever we have criticised the administration for overspending on children's social care because of the model of how they deliver it, they defend it wholeheartedly and say, we have to put those children first, and their interests justify the extra costs and the extra money that was put in year after year to children's social care. However, when it comes to adult social care, it feels that when you get to the other end of the age spectrum in terms of vulnerability, then there is a different modus operandi. And the reason why these homes were put forward, and it was included in the original decision, particularly for Homely House, was, well, adult social care needs to take one for the team in terms of our budget and our commitment to reducing our costs. And the reason why Homely House is going is because Rothwell Ward has 2 homes, and therefore you can afford to lose 1. So the primary focus of these decisions is budgetary. It is not care-based. And that is the problem with this decision. In terms of the occupancy of the homes, creative accounting is very easily done. I know that at the point that this decision was taken, the occupancy of Homely House was nearer 90%. Now, whether you're including people who are there for respite with people who are there as permanent residents, I don't know. But I know that it was at a higher occupancy rate than that which is quoted in this paper. The occupancy period which is quoted in this paper is during COVID. We know that people have been reticent about placing relatives in care homes when they have been the crucible of much infection of COVID, and therefore you would expect a lower occupancy in care homes. And there is also, of course, the issue around the council being the primary referrer to these care homes. And if they are subject to potential closure, you are not going to be making permanent placements there, I would hope. In terms of their sustainability, I have to confess that extra care housing is something which is very attractive, and I'm very pleased that extra care housing is going to be built in my ward in the near future. Curiously enough, it is being built on the site that the community wished to have built a replacement residential care home to replace both Dolphin Manor and Homely in a new purpose-built facility, which the council said would be appropriate for future needs. Homely House itself, also needs to be noted, was pointed out to be an exemplar of what the council wanted in terms of CQC needs when the council proposed to close Dolphin Manor, specifically because there were en-suites and Dolphin Manor had commodes, and therefore it was felt that that building had had sufficient investment put into it to merit retention. If the council is saying that residential care is in the past and there is no demand, why has it chosen to close just these homes? Why is it not proposing to close all of the ones that it has and be consistent in its message in terms of they are not needed? We know as ward councillors that they are needed. We know that their value towards local people is the fact that they are within the community that a lot of these people grew up in, or that their children, who are their primary carers, would like them to be enabled to live their latter years in. Therefore, there's just so much to go at it. And the problem is that the basis for the decision, as I've said, is budgetary and not care-based. And therefore, I cannot support the ultimate decision as an executive board member. And I implore you, from the previous conversation that was had about how the council has a much more positive financial position to be in, that some decisions which have been taken forward, once again, which supposedly have been done with a heavy heart and involve people being effectively evicted from their homes, could be reconsidered to see if they could be affordable going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Galt. I can't let the comment about the council's financial position without saying there is still considerable uncertainty over the future funding of the council. We do not know where any government initiative, we're on a one-year financial settlement from the government. We do not know when anything that have been proposed, such as so-called fair funding, will go. So the idea that the council is in a positive financial position is not one I can accept. We still have a huge amount of risk and uncertainty going forward, and we do not know year on year where, in terms of one-off social care grants or indeed the overall financial settlement is. That's a position we find ourselves in as a council. I'm going to see whether Councillor Venner would like to come back on any of those comments as well.
Yeah, I'd start by challenging on a financial point as well, which is the suggestion that adults is somehow being discriminated against in favour of children's social care. As I said in my introductory comments, adults and children's social care are now nearly 70% of our expenditure, but adult social care is by far the bigger chunk of those two. More money is spent on adult social care, you know, than any other directorate as a percentage of overall council spend, and both have been protected in the cuts that we've had to make, because as a Labour administration, the care of children and the care of older people and other people who have care needs is our priority. And it is not only a budgetary decision. The other context is the decline in demand for care homes. That's a reality, and it was a reality before the pandemic. There's an increase in people being supported in their own homes in the community, and a decline in the number of people living in care homes. And the numbers that Councillor Galton challenged are current. The occupancy rates that I gave are the current ones. There are currently 18 people living in Homely House and 14 vacancies at Dolphin Manor. And in terms of future demand, in coming up with this proposal and in doing all the background preparation for that, we've calculated that Rothwell is currently over-provided in terms of the amount of care home places that are available in the area, and that there are more than enough to meet likely future demand, given that is also in decline. With regard to why don't we just close all homes? Well, it's in this paper, and Kath has gone on record at the Outer South Community Committee as saying it would be her professional advice that we do not close any more care homes, and we've actually put that in this paper, that we're committed to keeping the remaining ones that we've got. We do want to keep being a provider while there is a demand for some care homes, and we want to give people the option of being able to be in a council care home as a specific provider, and we have made that commitment. Go back to the comment you made, Leader, at the beginning. The council is in a precarious position, and so is adult social care, and we are likely to have to spend additional money on the front door and on supporting older people who are living in the community. And as I said in my introductory comments, if we don't make these savings by closing Richmond House and Homely House, they will have to come out of somewhere else in adult social care, which, unlike care homes, are under increased demand.
Councillor Carter, please.
2 points. The first one, in particular about Richmond House, it's a respite care home. And Councillor Galton outlined people who would be visiting their loved ones in these homes. But he omitted partners. And of course, in the case of respite care, it is usually a partner who is admitted for a short period of time to give their other half, male or female, a break, but they are able, because of the close proximity, to visit. Now, those are the people, and you have to say that you do wonder whether we're giving this enough importance, but I personally give it great importance. And by closing Richmond House, that facility will be taken away. And to say the site is too small for supported housing, specialist housing, well, I don't accept that. I just think that to be polite to the officers is just an easy way of not bothering to do the rest of the work. And that's not necessarily your fault. It could be housing's fault, and probably is. But I'm getting a bit sick of the answer being no all the time. I think it's time that was put right. And we're reaching hopefully the end of the time when COVID's affected all our working habits, but it is time to step up to the mark in terms of other work as well. And I go back to the point I made originally, with 300 pages here to tell us what you told us way back in February. And I don't think it's acceptable. I don't think it's good for my constituents. I don't think it's good for West Leeds again. And I have to say, I agree with what Stuart said about the home in his own ward, which I'm not an expert on, so I wouldn't contradict him. And I do hope you reconsider this yet again. But certainly, general older people's housing, what does that mean? Anybody over the age of 55? That's not what we are looking for. And I say that slowly and deliberately to all the officers present. That is not what we are looking for. So I think you need to do some more work on this, but I am not going to vote in favour of it for the obvious reasons.
Thank you for those comments. Kath, would you like to come in again?
Yeah, just to, I suppose, reinforce the point Councillor Carter's made about people wanting to be close to the care home that their loved one is having a short break. That was exactly the challenge for Richmond House. Being a citywide resource, people from other parts of the city did not want to travel all that way to Richmond House for a short break. So when we looked at who has been using Richmond House over the past 3 years, of the 196 admissions, only 11 people were from Farsley. So I think positioning it as a local resource for local people doesn't really stand up when you scrutinise just where people came from. And that's one of the challenges around the low occupancy. So people chose to have their short break at a home closer to their loved ones, which is across all of the city in all of the good and outstanding homes that we have. So that was part of the challenge.
Sorry, can you use your, can you move your microphone?
Of the geography of the area is perhaps at play here, because 100 yards away you're in Stanningley, 100 yards away you're in Pudsey, and when you say Farsley people, to get to know the proper user, you'd have to go through all the people who'd stayed there, and you'd have to include among them residents of Stanningley and residents of Pudsey.
So even when we looked at the wider LS28, then 5 postcode, it was 37 people. So we did look wider, but it was still a smaller number compared to the people that came from across the wider city. So the point still stands.
Thank you. Are there any more comments on this item, please? I don't see there are, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 511. I noted during the conversation about this paper that both Councillor Galton and Councillor Carter indicated they were reserving their positions. So I take that still the case. They are both against. I will see everybody else is happy with this paper. So we've agreed the conclusions and the recommendations. And Councillor Venner, can we move on to item 23, please?
Chair, if you don't mind, I did just want to say as a final comment, just to reiterate that this isn't a proposal we've come to lightly. And my last comments I would want to make would be reassurance for residents who live in Homely House and their families. As I said at the beginning, you know, all moves will be done by experienced social workers, you know, with compassion, with their involvement, and similarly with people who rely on Richmond House for respite, we will work with them to make sure that we find alternatives that provide the respite that they need. And we're committed to working with the staff and trade unions around redeployment of staff. Thank you. I'll move on to my next report now, Leader. So this is the update report on Thrive, which is our child poverty strategy. And we agreed to report on this 6-monthly. This report is actually deferred from April, so we're slightly out of sync, and to get back in the rhythm of executive board and scrutiny, we'll come back to you again next in October. The report asks people to consider the Child Poverty Impact Board work in relation to their own portfolio, and work you can do around child poverty. Section 2.2 responds to a question from an elected member in scrutiny about why children are in poverty. And the report covers issues of rising prices outstripping wages, the insufficiency of the benefits system, the particular cruelty of universal credit and the 5-week wait, which is why most people use food banks, the right to buy diminishing housing stock, and social housing, which was once our largest housing stock, now being replaced by private rented as our largest amount of housing, which, as well as being insecure and expensive, is sometimes of poor quality. Pre-pandemic, 35,000 children in Leeds lived in poverty, which was 23% of the child population. But the previous Children's Commissioner anticipated that COVID has pushed an additional 300,000 children nationally into poverty. There's currently a cross-party campaign to retain the £20 uplift in universal credit, because removing that at the same time that furlough is ended will push more families into poverty. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimate an additional 200,000 families. In Leeds, the universal claimant numbers increased by almost 100% in Leeds last year, and 50,000 people in the city are currently on furlough. So we are potentially heading into a really challenging autumn around poverty and child poverty. The report covers the tasks of each work stream, the impact of the work, the effect of COVID, plans going forward. Projects include school uniform reuse, tackling gambling related harm, maximising the incomes of family, employability schemes, and poverty proofing social work practice. And I've said this many times, I think every time I've spoken about child poverty, it's very frustrating that we don't as a council control the levers to lift children out of poverty, but we do have a responsibility to ameliorate the impact as far as we can, and the report outlines how we are doing that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Are there any comments on this item? Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm flicking through the iPad to try and find the right page. It's harder than with paper. It was about the priorities that there are at the beginning of the paper, because I'm just wondering how the experience of COVID has helped to colour what our approach is, because I've made previous comments before about how we're very good at giving the prognosis, but we're not very good at providing and evaluating the treatment that we deliver as a city in terms of interventions. And I was just trying to find, there was one that was about, sorry, there were 5 priorities that were spelled out. Somebody who is producing the paper might be able to find them for me, but one of them in particular was about enabling educational achievement and enabling families to enable that to happen. Now, one of the big things under COVID was the fact that we had a lot of children that were in homeschooling, which is something which is far easier to achieve if you have the time and you also have the education to deliver it. And there are quite a few families, and I know that they exist in my ward at least, so they're going to be existing elsewhere in Greater Number 2, who have very limited numeracy and literacy due to their own educational experience. And that means that their children generationally also aren't able to be helped in as good a way as other parents, because the parents with the limited educational skills have less confidence to do so. So I was hoping that we would have something in this which recognised that experience over the past 18 months, and that we would have some kind of programme that we ourselves had thought of initiating, as opposed to waiting for the government to decide what their response was going to be to levelling up the outcomes of those children that have fallen behind during COVID, because obviously we have responsibility for it ourselves in our city. So where would I find that in this paper?
I'm going to answer first, and then I'll pass over to Julie if you want to add additional comments. Julie now leads on this work from a senior officer level. We did have a workshop recently of the Child Poverty Impact Board to look specifically at the issue Councillor Galton's raised around the context of COVID and whether the priorities that we had remained the right ones. And we came to the view that they were still the right priorities, which, as Councillor Galton said, includes readiness for learning and achieving at all levels of learning. What we felt was missing, that had been very highlighted by the pandemic, and so will be added into our future work, is that the pandemic very much highlighted inequality in relation to green space for children and young people. I mean, in my own ward, there are 7 high rises, and all of them have children in. So they're examples of housing where there's not a garden. and not always being very near a park. So green space is an area that we will be working on in the concept of child poverty as a direct result of reviewing our priorities after COVID. But I will pass over to Julie to answer the more specific questions about the education priority.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lewis. Yes, so when we have looked at the priority in relation to readiness for learning, there is a lot of activity that goes on to support parents. And I think within the directorate, within the council, that is about us taking that think family approach. So recognising the need to support parents and carers. It's a key feature within the 3A strategy. We have a number of parenting programmes which have been delivered throughout the pandemic. We've had some fantastic learning during the pandemic in terms of those parenting programmes being delivered virtually. In addition to that, I think within the 3A strategy, it is about this being everybody's business. So our early help practitioners, our social workers, you know, right across the directorate, when they are working and when they have those key relationships with families, it very much is about supporting the parents and the carers. And essentially, the start to that is building those trusting relationships. We have had examples where we have had parents who have attended children's centres and who actually haven't wanted or felt able to contribute to children's learning in terms of, you know, writing in journals, writing in daily journals. And it's a key feature of our services to engage, to build those trusting relationships so that parents and carers actually feel able to share that with us and to share the concerns and actually to share perhaps their own needs around literacy and other areas. So it absolutely is a golden thread that runs throughout that priority.
Chair,
Thank you, Julie. Would you like to come back, Councillor Golden?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, couldn't get your attention earlier. Can I therefore suggest, since I can't see any of that work and the evaluation of it in this paper, that we bring a paper to the next executive board, which specifically focuses on educational attainment and what we've achieved during the COVID period in terms of coming to conclusions as to how better we support children and their families.
As I said at the beginning, we do report on this agenda every 6 months. We will be coming back to Exec Board in October with our next report.
But you haven't got anything in here for one of your 6 major work streams that you mention in your report.
Yes, we have. All of the work streams demonstrate quantifiable impact. You know, whether it's listing, you know, how many meals we've given out during healthy holidays, how many period products we've given out that have helped people engage with education, or the additional income that families have got as a direct result of the maximising income funding stream. Every single work stream in this report outlines the impact of the work with qualitative feedback, case studies, quotes, as well as outputs of the work. Can I just add as well a point that I've made before? This report outlines some of the outputs, such as meals given out, devices, etc. It also has direct feedback from children and from families about the impact of the work that we have done. Every time I've brought this report, Councillor Galton, to this board, you have questioned me on outcomes. And I want to make a point that I've made before, that there is a moral imperative for doing this work. So, for example, with the Healthy Holidays programme, which feeds children, hungry children during holidays, we will do that whether or not it can demonstrate outcomes, because it is morally wrong that children are hungry. So while I feel this report is incredibly comprehensive in giving you lots of facts and figures about the work that we're doing, lots of direct feedback from people who've been impacted, it's also a moral imperative to do this work, and we will keep doing the work that we feel needs to be done to ameliorate the impact of child poverty.
Thank you, Councillor Venner, for that excellent response, and we'll certainly look at the reporting cycle to see what comes back here to make sure we provide the information that Councillor Galton has requested. Are there any more comments on this item, please? I don't see any, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 843 and see if everybody is happy with those, and I see those are agreed. So I will draw the this meeting to a close. We've got the public section of this meeting to a close, and we've got a small number of papers to deal with on the below the line item.